Hello, and welcome to the Authors Guild Foundation's 29th Annual Gala. What an amazing coincidence that this gala and I both turned 29 this year. Oh, how we have aged. The theme of this evening is Books Inspire Change, which has certainly been the case this past year. I mean, how would we have passed the time without books? I honestly don't know. I do not have other hobbies. In times of crisis, we look to authors for enlightenment, escape, and the next great story to be turned into an award-winning HBO limited series. But books are more than entertainment. They highlight our common humanity. Tonight, we're going to hear from some truly inspiring authors whose work has opened minds to new possibilities and asked society to reckon with difficult truths. That's why we're so happy to be celebrating with everyone virtually. Oh, sure, black tie dinners can be fun, but joining from your laptop in your pajamas is more accessible to everyone. Although I'm sure most of you wish that you could just join directly from your Kindle. So a big thank you to all of the Authors Guild Foundation's donors for supporting this charitable work so that we could make this evening free and open to all. Tonight, we will be honoring Louise Erdrich, Dr. Ibram Kendi, and publisher One World, led by Chris Jackson. We'll be hearing from each of them as well as more of your favorite authors who will tell us about the books that inspired them. The Authors Guild Foundation exists because we all want more inspiring books in our lives, and even books that are maybe not inspiring but make for a great late-night raunchy read in the bathtub. The foundation supports literary culture by helping authors in the fight for a living wage and enabling them to keep writing books. Look, none of us wants to live in a world where only those who are already rich can afford to write a book, and I certainly do not want any late-night raunchy reads written by people like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk. The foundation advocates for authors to be treated fairly and helps new and struggling authors make it in the industry. This ensures that more books can be written from people in marginalized communities or by people without access to elite connections so that we can all enjoy a world of literature that is truly diverse. And now I would like to introduce the president of the Authors Guild, author Douglas Preston.
Thank you, Samantha, and what a delight it is to have you hosting our gala. My name is Doug Preston. I am the president of the Authors Guild, which is the oldest and largest professional association of authors and journalists in the country. And we are so happy to be able to come together this evening to celebrate the power of literature and the importance of authors and journalists. Now, we're coming out of a year that has been like no other. Human beings have always dealt with dark times like these by telling stories. For thousands of years, even before the written word, telling stories was not just a survival mechanism, but it was a way to overcome adversity, to transmit our deepest values to our children, and to reaffirm our humanity in the face of tragedy. Our stories connect us through time and space. And that's exactly what we've seen in this pandemic year, a tremendous outpouring of extraordinary creative work by authors, journalists, and poets. And this has been a year also when so many readers have rediscovered the pleasures of the book and gotten rid of that streaming stuff. During this time, the American people have looked to authors and journalists to tell the truth, to serve justice, to draw back the curtain on racism, political corruption, and some of the evils in our society, and also to bring us joy and inspiration. So this gala benefits the Authors Guild Foundation, which is the Guild's charitable arm. It's the arm of the Guild that essentially its mission is to support and nurture literary culture and all writers, not just our membership. We are the only writers organization with a full-time lobbyist in Washington, down there lobbying not for tax breaks for oil companies or pharmaceuticals, but actually lobbying on behalf of American literary culture, which I think is pretty cool. The Guild is a highly effective organization. This is one of the things I love about this organization. We are very, very good at what we do, and we do it with remarkable financial efficiency. The bottom line is this. Most authors are struggling today like never before. Writers need to earn a living. Without that, books will not be written. And now this form of censorship is far more dangerous, in my opinion, and pernicious than actual censorship because it is invisible, it is silent, and most importantly, it falls most heavily on voices from underserved and overlooked communities, young authors, authors of color, and those espousing controversial or unusual ideas. And these are the voices we most need to hear. And the Authors Guild Foundation is dedicated to getting these voices heard. Accomplishing all this involves hard work and, of course, the financial generosity of those who love books. So, I hope you won't mind if I take a few minutes to express our incredible gratitude to our sponsors for tonight. Our epic supporters are Anonymous, Michelle and David Baldacci, Lee Child, Jane Grant and Ruth Grant, and the Writers House Literary Agency, in particular Simon Lipscar and Dan Conaway. Our platinum supporters are Dan Brown, Suzanne Collins and Charles Pryor, and Douglas and Christine Preston. Our gold supporters are the estate of Wilma Carroll, HarperCollins Publishers, Penguin Random House, Laura Peterson, Diana Rowan Rockefeller. Silver supporters, RB Media. And bronze supporters, Amazon Literary Partnership, Sandra Brown, the estate of Aaron Frankel, Hachette Book Group, Macmillan Publishers, Catherine Neville, Roxana and Hamilton Robinson, Simon & Schuster, and Jane Stein and R.L. Stein. If you would like to join these donors, I would be very happy and thankful to you. Just please feel free to go to click the donate button at the bottom of the screen. Any donation is welcome. Every gift will make a difference. So tonight, we are very excited to be honoring 3 individuals for their incredible impact on American literature and our lives. Louise Erdrich, Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, and Chris Jackson of Random House's One World imprint. It is my great honor to present the Authors Guild Foundation Award for distinguished service to the literary community to one of my personally favorite authors, Louise Erdrich. Louise is a national treasure as a novelist and poet. Her work evokes emotional and visceral responses through lyrical prose, often telling the intergenerational stories of Indigenous and mixed-race Americans, exploring both universal truths and the specifics of the Native experience. Her novels include Love Medicine, The Plague of Doves, The Roundhouse, and, most recently, The Night Watchman. She has won the National Book Award, 2 National Book Critics Circle Awards, the Library of Congress Prize, as well as receiving wide acclaim from readers and critics for her remarkable body of work. She also serves on the Advisory Council of the Authors Guild, and she is the owner of a wonderful bookstore in Minneapolis called Birch Bark Books, which is a shining example of an independent bookstore that provides a literary home to the entire community. So we are all grateful for Louise's many contributions to American literature, and I can't wait to hear a conversation with Rumaan Alam. That is going to be very interesting. My heartfelt congratulations to Louise Erdrich, and I only wish I could be there, Louise, in person to present you with this award. Later this evening, we'll present awards to Ibram X. Kendi and Chris Jackson, and we'll hear from many wonderful authors throughout the night. So thank you all for celebrating with us tonight. I hope to see you all in person in 2022. And now I'll turn it back over to Samantha Bee to continue tonight's festivities. Thank you.
Thank you, Douglas Preston. Now let's hear from some incredible authors about the books that changed their world. I wonder if anyone has I Know I Am, But What Are You by renowned author Samantha Bee on their list. What's that? I'm being told that they do not. Well, I don't know if I agree with you. I guess we'll see. Take it away.
Hi, I am Isabel Allende. A book that was really important in my life I read in puberty, hiding inside a closet with a flashlight, because it was supposed to be erotic, and I, being only 13, was not allowed to read it. 1001 Nights. This happened in Lebanon many, many years ago, and that book initiated me in the vice of fantasy and eroticism. And I think that both have been essential in my life and, of course, in my writing.
Hi, I'm John Grisham. The first book I ever read that caused me to think about serious matters was To Kill a Mockingbird. I grew up in the racially segregated, very racist Jim Crow world of the Deep South in the 1950s and 60s. When I read that book at the age of 15, I realized that it took great courage to show tolerance. At the age of 15, I didn't have that courage. And I've spent the years since trying to find it.
If I had to choose one book, I think actually it would be Little Women. It was the first time I understood that there could be a society of women who were concerned about war and peace and survival and helping their neighbors and still be unique individuals. I'm so grateful for that because otherwise there was not so much in the era of my childhood that said that.
I'm Rita Dove, and the book has to be, for me, Shakespeare, the entire Shakespeare, but specifically one soliloquy in Macbeth. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day, which my mother used to say whenever she was exhausted, and I, as a 10-year-old, thought she had made up. And when I discovered this incredibly beautiful and apt quote in the Scottish play in Macbeth, I was hooked.
Hi, I'm Viet Nguyen. I'm a writer, and the book I've chosen is Maxine Hong Kingston's The Woman Warrior. This is my college copy and one that Maxine has inscribed to me on the inside flap. Interesting story about this relationship with Maxine. I was her student at Berkeley, got into her creative nonfiction writing class, 14 students, immense privilege. I'm 19 years old. I show up, and what do? I sit 5 feet away from her, and I fall asleep every single day of the semester. Well, she's forgiven me for that, thankfully. She didn't have to, but I picked this book because it, of course, when it was published in 1976, became an instant feminist classic, an American classic, and certainly an Asian American classic. It's influenced so many writers, including me. It raises really critical issues around the ethics of storytelling, about the immigrant experience, about Asian American women's experiences. It's a sort of a model book for anyone who wants to become a writer. I teach it every semester when I do my Asian American literature course, and it's endlessly rewarding. So I'm recommending it to you.
Hello, my name is Kalia Yang. I'm coming to you from St. Paul, Minnesota, the American Midwest. I'm delighted at this opportunity to speak and to pay homage to Louise Erdrich's Love Medicine. I met the book when I was in 9th grade in Mr. English's 9th grade pre-IB English course. The book changed for me what I thought language could do in terms of representing a culture and a people and a family, in terms of telling the story not only of oneself, but others united in the human experience. I cherish the book, I cherish the legacy of Louise Erdrich, and I'm so proud to be working from her state, my state, our state. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Terry Carton, Louise Erdrich's editor at HarperCollins Publishers. I am thrilled to congratulate you, Louise, on receiving this award from the Authors Guild Foundation. What a great honor, one that you so well deserve. Your support for other writers and the way that you read their work and promote it as a committed independent bookseller make a tremendous contribution to literature and to the community of writers of which you are a part. Thank you for doing this through the most trying year, and congratulations on this recognition by the Authors Guild of all that you do for writers and readers and books. Bravo, Louise. I am very, very happy for you.
Hello, my name is Jonathan Burnham. I'm the president and publisher of the Harper imprint at HarperCollins. Louise, I'm so proud to be your publisher. We've had such a long association with you over countless brilliant novels, short story collections, poetry collections, essays. It's an incredible, long, deep link between a publisher and an author. And congratulations on this award. You're such a great advocate for other writers, both as a bookseller, but also as a force out there. Thank you for everything you do, and all the best from everybody at HarperCollins.
Engaging conversation can be just as important as engaging books, although it lacks that incredible leather-bound smell. Like books, conversation can have the power to unite people from different backgrounds. I believe the world would be better if more people just got together and talked. I also believe it would stop my neighbor from leaving me passive-aggressive notes on my car. So I'm delighted to present Louise Erdrich in conversation with Rumaan Alam. As you know, Louise Erdrich is tonight's honoree for Distinguished Service to the Literary Community. Her entire body of work is singularly powerful, including her most recent novel, The Night Watchman. And Rumaan Alam is the National Book Award nominated author of Leave the World Behind. Let's see what they have to say.
I'm Rumaan Alam, and it's such a great pleasure to be here tonight as a guest of the Authors Guild to speak to one of my heroes, Louise Erdrich. Louise, as we've heard, is being honored tonight for her service to the literary community, and I am going to badger her with questions. Louise, congratulations on this great honor.
Thank you so much, Rumaan. I'm delighted just to have this chance to talk to you, Rumaan. One of my very favorite writers, someone who has been in sporadic contact during this time, and it's always been really important to me, very meaningful.
Well,
thank you for. I just want to say that it's an unexpected honor to be here with everyone at the Authors Guild. This means a lot to me. Thank you very much.
So, Louise, the nature of this particular award, you're someone who's you've collected a lot of awards over the course of your career for the work that you've done as an artist. This is a different kind of award. This is talking about this is in recognition of your service to the literary community. And I wondered whether you consider the work that you do, the novels that you write, the stories that you write, the poetry that you write, the work for younger readers, I wonder if you consider that connected to this idea of service, or whether you think of this award as being for a part of your life that's separate from your work as an artist. Is mentorship and political activism, is that part of art? Is that one practice?
It is and it isn't. And I have to say first that I consider my primary role as a bookseller with a bookstore to be of service to the literary community. This is, as everyone in the trade knows, bookselling is not something you go into for any kind of financial gain. It's service, but it's one of the best things I ever have done. It's given back much more emotionally, intellectually, and there's many headaches, but there's also a lot of joy. And during this past year, it has proven itself to me. People began to rely on books in a different way, and it was fascinating and challenging for us. And being able to stay open, being considered an essential service was kind of it was surprising to me, that books would be and wonderful. Of course, I think books are essential, and you think books are essential.
Yes.
But that so many people in the rest of the world would come to say, this is the time when I need a book. I need to be with a book. It's a time when I want to connect with another consciousness, alive, dead, another consciousness. And that's what books are really about, more so than any other form of art, perhaps than music.
When we started this conversation, you were talking to me about the book that you're working on now. So you are engaged still in the practice of being an artist. And I wonder, as you are writing those pages, as you are creating that story, is the political or cultural import of that particular story on your mind, or are you just working in a more pure, I am an artist, I am free kind of way?
I always want to be in that I'm only an artist. I'm everything else. Shut out the political. No, but it always is there. And from the first choice that you make as a writer, it's there, and it's not something you can really ignore. And so you begin to feel that it has to be part of the work somehow, and I think that's the challenge: how to make it seamlessly part of the work without falling into some sort of polemic, It's the same thing as becoming sentimental for me, which is one of my one of the things I, as a parent, is always where I'm most vulnerable. But becoming sentimental or becoming political in the work is something I really try. Becoming overtly political or sentimental is something I'm always trying not to fall into. It's like the quicksand of writing, the writing process for me.
Do you think that the book actually possesses the power to do something, to change the way people think, to change the way society functions?
Well, I love this study that was done maybe about 5 years ago, where people were given different texts to read and then scored on an exam that was like pre-book empathy or post-book empathy, and came out with more understanding somehow after reading not just any text, but it had to be literary texts. And I thought that was very interesting. If it wasn't a literary text, giving that insight into another human consciousness, it didn't seem to work, but there was a marked difference. And that gave me that startled me, except that I knew it was true. And I think, do you know it's true as well? In a way, because how you respond to books?
Yes, I want to believe it's true for all readers. And I think about you saying that for you, the sentimental is like, that there are rails, that you don't want to be too sentimental, and you don't want to be, you're not writing political invective. You have to sort of sit in between those poles and talk to a reader gently and directly. Do you think that the art has that responsibility? Do you think that if you're engaged in writing a book, you have to be thinking about what it's saying, and that there's a responsibility for the artist to know what they're saying directly to their reader? Or do you think that there should be a freedom from this notion of service or community, that there can be a sort of pure art that's not concerned with our politics?
I do think there should be both, but I think if you're writing, even if you're writing something that you feel is pure art, let's take the last part of the Copenhagen trilogy, this book that I read a couple of months ago, in which I think the author is writing as though this is only, I'm only writing down my life, what happened, or maybe she's fictionalizing some of it, but it doesn't seem as though she wrote it for other people to read. And yet it's incredibly political in its treatment of gender violence. We would give it lots of labels now, and maybe in the past as well, different words. But it's incredibly political because she's so superbly measured, honest, and doesn't really include some sort of overt awareness of what she's writing, of the rest of the world. It's this relationship.
I mean, I think that lays bare that in some ways, the work of an artist who's a woman, as you are, the work of an artist who is a Native person, as you are, is inescapably political because of that particular context. That your work will always be viewed through that lens. Have you ever found that to be burdensome or difficult, or do you find that kind of liberation?
I early on decided that I couldn't care a lot about what perception. I feel it's a very big responsibility on one hand, but that if I took it to heart, it would get into me. It would get into me in a way that would hurt the writing. So if, for instance, I wanted to write about the German side of my family, yes, that was considered political, that I wouldn't always write about. In fact, there was, I remember a headline, Louise Erdrich should go back to the reservation. This was for the Beat Queen, you know. And in fact, I met the person who wrote that review, and he said, I shouldn't have said that. But he didn't actually say this was a headline, but that was basically, that was the review, is stick to what you know. But I know because I'm a marginal, my identities are always marginal, and I've become, I don't want to become comfortable in my life. I think that's, I don't know who said this. Someone said that's the wolf at the door when a writer becomes too comfortable. But I'm not comfortable in my identities. I'm always parsing out what, where, who, you know, that's when you're a mixture of backgrounds, it's political only because you don't land on the exact identity that people expect all the time, you know.
Do you feel among those responsibilities that I think maybe every writer feels a certain kind of responsibility just from sitting down to from page one, but do you feel a desire in your work to provide more? So you mentioned earlier, like, you're seducing from the beginning. It's storytelling practice, and your books, that is one thing that I think is so consistent across your body of work, is this interest in telling a good story. But my sense is that you feel a responsibility as well to tell a story with some significance, to tell a story that maybe hasn't been told or hasn't been heard. Maybe. I think it's stories, these stories have been told, but maybe they haven't been heard. So I think personally, looking at your body of work, that the work itself is a component of the service. Do you think that's true, or does that not matter to you?
It matters a great deal because I grew up, it's the way I grew up. I didn't think about my identity at all. I was just who I was in a small North Dakota town with a Ojibwe mother and a German father. So it wasn't something that became part of my awareness until I left. And then it became an enlarged part of my awareness once I started writing. But I only wrote what I could write, and that's what writers do. You can only write what presents itself, the characters that presents themselves. However, what presents itself to me more and more often are the lacuna, the holes in history that people don't know. That's why I wrote about the termination policy. And I see this in particular with Native people because of the tremendous ongoing erasure that began, over 500 years ago. But that erasure was on so many levels: physical, cultural, and in terms of it was, we went from an extermination to an acculturation policy in the last century, and now there's an enormous attempt and a successful attempt, I really have to say, to revitalize Native culture, Native language. And so I have been a part of that in some ways, and my children really have been part of that.
I think that your books capture, Native life, both contemporary and in the past. We live in a cultural moment that maybe takes on faith that the decimation of a Native culture in this land has been successful, has concluded. But I'm struck by hearing you say that that's not true, that there is in fact a project of revitalization. And I think that this is a project that you are a very active participant in outside the work in your novel. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about what you're doing, especially your relationship to language.
It is outside the work because it's part of it's part of this force that Indigenous people have, this tremendous community, and that's part of where I find a lot of peace, being with other people. And so being with other people in ceremonies, in dance, in language, and humor. I mean, it's always funny to be with people, and you can't I can't really live without that. I can't. I grew up with this, so I can't live without it. And it is outside of the literature. But that there is this sense right now, and it's always been in my mind, like Native people survived, Indigenous people are here, and that's always what I'm thinking. I'm just like, we're here in every form, even if I have pale skin, even if I don't know all of my language, we are here, and we have to rebuild the fractured cultures that we are left with. Some people have more, some people have less.
But one thing that is so striking to me, because you did mention your parents, and you did mention that it sounds to me like a community that's deeply important to you is the community at Birch Bark, which is your independent bookstore in Minneapolis. Do you think that this notion of the importance of community is something that was instilled in you in your upbringing?
Absolutely. I mean, my tribal nation, the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa, I'm a Pembina band member, and it was always important to me to be part of that community. And it was important to me to be part of my small town community. And I was the weirdo in the community, which was even more important. I ran around in my father's National Guard outfit and put fringe on it. This was I always wanted to be part of something larger. I never wanted to be someone who spoke for anyone else. I just wanted to try and maintain my own. It's been hard. I haven't always been able to maintain my life as a life of total integrity. I'm imperfect. I'm not that kind of person who can stand for other people. But one thing is true also. I'm very happy to be honored by the Authors Guild. Part of it's because I think what the Authors Guild is doing is so important. And I wouldn't have really been able to see that if I hadn't been working as a bookseller and found that working in that world is much more than a commercial transaction. And what we do, although it's much more than a commercial transaction, is also very deeply based on the fact that we have to survive, that for art to survive, we have to have the advocacy to allow us to survive. I don't think any one of us could do alone what the Authors Guild does. So I'm proud to have been a member and always will be, to bring other people in, and this honor means a great deal to me.
It points to something that you and I were talking about before we began this conversation, which is your bookstore, and it's important, the importance of the book to all of us in a moment of crisis. And that's what this last year has been. It's been a moment of crisis. Yes. And if you have to look for the silver lining, I think that is a silver lining, this rediscovery that the book really does matter, not just to people like you and I who we care about books because it's our life and our livelihood, but to the culture more broadly. And that makes me feel a sense of optimism I guess I want to hold on to that, you know?
I do too, and I love what you just said, the sense of optimism, even if the book that you're holding up is a dystopic novel, it's still, I think it's the physical book that people were coming in for. It still does present this moment of optimism when someone asks for a book and you're able to fill that wish for a book. I hope we don't forget everything that's been happening to us this year.
Yeah.
I hope that we keep this sense of how much the world and the earth mean to us and how much our physical existence on this earth, how fragile it is, but how full of extraordinary life this world is, how meaningful.
Well, Louise, your body of work reminds me of that when I have the opportunity to revisit it. It's such a great pleasure to be here tonight, to be the person who interrogates you and helps celebrate this particular honor. Congratulations. It really, on behalf of everybody watching, on behalf of the Authors Guild, I will just presume to say thank you for what you have done for readers, for writers, for literary culture the world over. This award is much deserved.
I love talking to you, Rumaan, and thank you.
Hi, I'm Paula Hawkins, and I'm going to talk about The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. I first read the book at school when I was about 17. We'd been studying a lot of Shakespeare and Chaucer and a couple of Brontes, and then along came Margaret Atwood, and she was a complete revelation. I was thrilled by this dark and terrifying feminist dystopia. It was unlike anything I'd read before. It was a deeply political book, but it was also so readable. It was funny and tender and really scary. I think it changed my view of what a novel could do. It really made me realize the power of a fictional work. And it was one of the books that made me want to become a writer.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jason Reynolds. And one of the books that really changed my life is a book called Monster by the late, great Walter Dean Myers. And, you know, it's interesting because the reason that it affected me so greatly were actually for two reasons. Number one, it was the first time that I'd read a book that really delved into the ideas around the way that we label children, the way that we project titles onto them that they don't necessarily deserve, so that we can then punish them in ways that they don't always deserve as well. And it also sort of, you know, really unpacked the ideas around who is guilty, who is not, what is true, how do we know something is true, and can you actually believe it after a person has been accused? And so those were the reasons that it really affected me. The other thing, though, is that Walter decided to break convention. He decided to sort of push the limits of form and format by writing this book, both epistolary, but also in script. And I just don't think I've seen that. And that was a really special thing, too. So shout out to the great Walter Dean Myers and shout out to Monster.
Hi, my name is Alice Wong, and I love furry critters. I have a feeling that Peter Spotters, the tale of Peter Rabbits, planted that seed in me at an early age. I received a collection of stories for my birthday when I was a child, and it fully immersed me in a universe of dynamic, funny, and fallible animal characters. Peter Spotter's detailed illustrations made me want to be a rabbit. He'd eat bread, milk, and blackberries by the hearth. I identified with Peter, who was such a troublemaker. Just thinking of it now makes me smile. I'll always thank Peter Spotter for sparking my imagination.
Hi, I'm Gia Tolentino, and a book that changed my world is Naomi Morikawa's The First Civil Right: How Liberals Built Prison America. I first read it during the protests last year, and I've been recommending it and giving copies to friends ever since. It is absolutely clarifying about 20th century history, about the carceral system, and I think it's an essential book for anyone who's interested in abolition as the horizon that we should be moving towards.
The book that has single-handedly changed and impacted my life is Their Eyes Were Watching God, Zora Neale Hurston's masterpiece. I read it in the 11th grade in Honolulu, Hawaii, and I remember Janie Mae Crawford's story feeling so personal, so intimate, her quest for self, her quest to be heard, her quest to love, and seeing the tragedy of just when she found true love, having to come back from the dead and tell her best friend Phoebe her story, to me still is a reckoning. It's a balm. It's a guide for me. It was a true guide as I was writing and embarking on my first book, Redefining Realness. I stole the structure of that book from Their Eyes Were Watching God, the act of self-revelation, the act of telling one story, the act of unapologetically, as a Black woman, taking up space in the world.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Mary Rasenberger. I'm CEO of the Authors Guild and the Authors Guild Foundation. It's so wonderful to hear from all these amazing authors tonight about the books that have inspired them. We are here tonight to celebrate the incredible power of books as catalysts for change and for new ideas. Important social movements always start with great books. Those books don't get written and published unless writers have the time to write and get paid, so they have the time, and have the resources and the know-how to get published. And that's where the Authors Guild Foundation comes in. We provide free resources, education, know-how to tens of thousands of writers all around the country. And we specifically target marginalized writers and those without connections and resources so that their voices can be heard too. Through our advocacy, we protect the constitutional rights of authors to benefit from their work. We lobby Congress, we lobby state governments, we take on industry players when they're not playing fairly, and we provide free legal assistance to writers when they need it. You know, we do this so that talented writers can keep writing and continue to open our minds and stretch our minds to new ideas, new ways of thinking, new worlds. And I have to say, our advocacy is incredibly effective and has real life impact. It's just one example. This past year, we made sure that freelance writers who lost work in the pandemic could get pandemic unemployment assistance. When the CARES Act was first passed, believe it or not, it did not provide relief for those who could work from home. And we recognized that immediately. We went to Congress, we raised hell, and we got the Department of Labor to add criteria that covered those who could work from home but had lost work. And in doing so, we put millions of dollars into the pockets of thousands of writers. This year, we also succeeded in enacting a small copyright claims court in the Copyright Office. It is a affordable, easy-to-use tribunal for copyright infringement, and for the first time ever, writers and other creators will be able to enforce their rights. We lobbied also and worked really hard drafting federal legislation to hold the mega internet platforms responsible for the massive amounts of ebook and audiobook piracy that they host. And I am happy to say we now have draft legislation in the Senate, and we have backers on both sides of the aisle and in both houses. I want to thank the writers who came to DC and helped us lobby virtually and in person. But we've done so much more than that this year, and I don't want to keep you here all night. I want to move on to our panel and the other awards. But if you're interested in our work, go to our website, www.authorsguild.org. Needless to say, we don't do any of our work without the support of our generous donors. So I want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart. And anyone watching tonight, if you want to join them, please click the donate button at the bottom of your screen. Now, back to the awards. Ibram Kendi, I'm honored to present to you the Authors Guild Foundation Award for Literature that Inspires Change. Your prolific work, including Stamped from the Beginning, How to Be an Anti-Racist, has reshaped our understanding of racism as a systemic problem in this country and that we're all complicit in it unless we fight it. And with the recent powerful collection, 400 Souls, you've created a new and truer form of historical understanding and reckoning. Ibram, thank you so much for your powerful work. I am also greatly honored to present the Authors Guild Foundation Publisher Award for Literature that Inspires Change to Chris Jackson on behalf of One World. One World's mission perfectly matches tonight's theme. It is committed to publishing forward-thinking, subversive, and compelling work of all genre. And to quote One World, your writers represent voices from across the spectrum of humanity telling critical, universally important, and compelling stories about a changing world. You've published incredible work from authors in poetry, fiction, and nonfiction, authors including Ta-Nehisi Coates, Kathy Park Hong, and Dr. Kendi. Chris and everyone at One World, thank you so much for your work. And now I'd like to turn it over to Marcus Doley, the CEO of Penguin Random House.
Hello, everyone. Many thanks to the Authors Guild for this special evening. On behalf of all of us at Penguin Random House, our heartfelt congratulations to Dr. Ibram Kendi, our pathfinding author, and to Chris Jackson, the visionary publisher and editor-in-chief of Random House's One World imprint. Dr. Kendi's books challenge, inspire, and transform us like few others. Through books like How to Be an Anti-Racist, 400 Souls, and Anti-Racist Baby, he has become a leader in our national reckoning with entrenched systems of racism, class, gender, and identity, conveying urgency, means, and actionable hopes for change and resolve. Dr. Kendi's books are being brought to us by his editor and publisher, Chris Jackson. As head of his singular One World publishing program, Chris and his colleagues are powerful champions helping to shape a society that embodies one world of human values. Brian Stevenson, Kathy Park Hong, and Ta-Nehisi Coates are only a few of the authors Chris has nurtured as their publishing partner. Congrats again, and many, many thanks to you, Dr. Kendi, and to you, Chris, for leading us forward. It is very much appreciated by all of us.
And now, our honorees for literature that inspires change, Dr. Ibram Kendi and One World's Chris Jackson. Kendi's Stamped from the Beginning and How to Be an Anti-Racist should be required reading for everyone. In fact, I've been sending copies of these books to everyone I know who just had a baby. Sure, he has children's versions of these books, but I don't feel like we give toddlers enough credit. They can handle it. And the same can be said for everything that Chris Jackson edits and publishes. So here they are in conversation with award-winning author Marie Arana, a board member of the Authors Guild Foundation and the literary director of the Library of Congress. Take a listen. Oh, there's my cat rubbing his face on my computer and shaking it.
Thank you, Sam. I'm thrilled to be here with two Authors Guild honorees I greatly admire. Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, distinguished best-selling author of Stamped from the Beginning and How to Be an Anti-Racist, and Chris Jackson, publisher and founder of One World, surely one of the most dynamic, innovative, and relevant imprints in publishing today. Congratulations to you both for these honors, to you, Ibram, as an author, and to you, Chris, as a publisher. Welcome to our celebration. Ibram, I had the very good fortune to meet you when I invited you not once but twice to the Library of Congress's National Book Festival to talk about each of the books I just mentioned, and you gallantly accepted. You wowed the audiences, and with good reason. Your books have made us think deeply about our own parts in and responsibilities for systemic racism, and I especially appreciate that you do not exempt yourself from failings when you talk about what needs to be done. I want to congratulate you, too, for your newest book, 400 Souls, A Community History of African America, 1619 to 2019, which was published only recently and climbed onto bestseller lists the very day it was released. Given your new position as founder and director of the Center for Anti-Racist Research at Boston University, I trust we'll see more eye-opening work from you in the future. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. It's an honor.
Chris, as someone who has been knocking around the publishing industry for many years now, I want to thank you for One World's extraordinary contributions to book culture. Let me just name a few of your releases for our viewers' edification. The Water Dancer and Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates, Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson, The Sum of Us by Heather McGee, and of course, Ibram's books, among many other African-American greats. But as a Latina author and someone who has been striving to inform the public about just who we are, I want to thank you for the greater diversity you bring to publishing. You've published My Broken Language by Chiara Alegría Judes, The Undocumented Americans by Carla Cornejo Villavicencio, Sabrina and Karina by Kali Fajardo Anstine, and a whole slew of books, fiction, nonfiction, poetry by Asian Americans, Arab and East Indian Americans, Native Americans, LGBTQ authors, and authors with disabilities. In short, One World has published important, urgent, groundbreaking books that have deepened our understanding of Americans, humanity, history, and potentially the future. You've changed the American conversation and made it a far richer one. So thank you, Chris.
Well, thank you.
Thank you both. So I want to kick off this brief conversation by focusing on the theme for this gala. Books inspire change. Certainly for each of you, change has been the lodestone of your careers. Your books, specifically Ibram, and your bank of books generally, Chris, have been catalysts for change. So let me ask each of you, what inspired you to want to change the American conversation? Ibram?
Well, I think that in many ways the American conversation is holding us back from the ways in which we're connected, as human beings. The current American conversation is causing people to think people are the problem, as opposed to policies and power. The American conversation is in many ways a racist conversation, and I thought that encouraging people to see how precisely it is a racist conversation, but then also more importantly the type of conversation that we should have instead, which is more of an anti-racist conversation, a conversation in which we can recognize different racial groups as equals, in which we can see the practices and policies that are ensnaring certain groups of people, I thought would allow for the really flourishing of democracy and equity and justice for all.
Yeah, beautifully put. Thank you for that. And Chris, what inspired you to want to change what I call the American conversation? And Ibram has just dissected perfectly.
Yeah. So for me, it's funny, talking with Ibram about this, because I think that for me it was very similar to what it was for Ibram, which I discovered when I was working with him on how to be an anti-racist, which is, we're all kind of born and we come into this world, and particularly those of us who, have identities that have been marginalized or oppressed historically, and we enter a world where we have a lot of questions, where the world doesn't necessarily make sense to us. And the stories that we're being told don't make sense of the world for us, right? So, and Ibram and I both grew up at least partially in New York. I grew up entirely in New York, Ibram partially in New York. If you consider Queens part of New York, which I'll allow for this conversation.
Which does something to you, absolutely, yeah.
He says I'm an interloper, but it's okay.
But growing up in New York also, you're surrounded by people of all kinds, and the world is this kind of really fascinating, rich, interesting place that is constantly raising questions for you about why do some people live like this, other people live like that? Why are we, particularly as Black people, seemingly at the bottom of this hierarchy? Is that because of us? Is it because of something else? And you need stories that can make sense of that world for you, because otherwise you'll grow up in despair and self-hatred, right? You need to understand the world you're brought into, which is, one of the things that really fascinates me about some of the controversies that are around the work that people like Dr. Kendi do, because it's just an attempt to answer these fundamental questions. There's not even an agenda going into it. It's just like, I need to understand the world, and the stories that we're being told don't make sense. The ones that tell us we're not as smart, we're not as, that there's something wrong with us morally or ethically or culturally or whatever, don't make sense based on what I see in the world around me. And I need to find the stories that will make this world, that will square that circle, make this world make sense.
Wow. And, you say that this all came to be because of New York, and certainly an urban setting does put it right in your face. I mean, it's right there. The rich, the poor, the literate, the illiterate, the beautiful, the ugly, all of it is there. Do you think that you would have had your consciousness or your conscience pricked and maybe provoked had you been sitting in a rural place somewhere? Do you think that that made a difference, the rural and the urban? For both of you, because you're both big city guys.
Well, I would just say quickly for myself, I think, yes, for sure. Like, I had family that was in the, the American South, like in North Carolina and Alabama and Virginia, and in the Midwest. I spent a lot of time in Ohio, where, some of my family was. And so being part of that sort of, American and African American sort of migratory diaspora that exists within America, you can see the exact same questions are sort of occurring everywhere you go in different ways, but they're there.
Yeah, I would affirm that, and also state that I think growing up in an urban setting, in the most thorough borough in New York City, Queens, I think my perspective is largely an urban perspective, particularly as it relates to some of these fundamental questions. And I at least hope that if I would have grown up in a rural setting, I would be asking some of the same fundamental questions, but just from a rural perspective where some of the same issues persist and exist.
No doubt. What are the books that changed you, Ibram? What are the books that sort of made you sit up and made you take notice of what you needed to do?
Man, there's so many that changed me. I think one book I will highlight, and I think it's a book that many, particularly writers who are writing on race and racism, or Black life or African American history, keep returning to is W.B. Du Bois's sort of magnum opus, Black Reconstruction, which he published in 1935, about 32 years after he published The Souls of Black Folk, which of course he's most known for. And I think the reason why that book changed me is because it changed the way that I understood history could be written. And so you literally had someone who decided one day that he was going to write this sweeping, massive tome that struck at the heart of Jim Crow historiography, that imagined that the Reconstruction era was this horror story that ultimately was saved by the Ku Klux Klan. And he then also recognized how that false historical narrative contributed to the maintenance of Jim Crow in the 1930s. And so he, I think even though he wrote a history book, he was writing a now book, and that he felt would be useful for the president. And so I think it inspired me in terms of how we can write history that's relevant.
Beautiful. How about you, Chris? Was there a specific book or books?
Yeah, well, there's so many books. I mean, it's true of anyone, I guess, who reads. But, I think, a book, I'll just talk even just as a publisher, a book that I think changed me was, you mentioned that we publish Bryan Stevenson's Just Mercy. Working with Bryan on that book was probably, transformative for me in a lot of ways. I mean, first of all, in that Brian himself is such an extraordinary figure. And I think I've had the amazing good fortune to work with lots of really remarkable authors, and Brian is definitely in that category as someone who is both someone who's been, active in the world in literally saving people's lives and acting with such deep compassion, but also with such, intelligence and with such strategy around changing law and expanding rights. But also someone who's just a really good storyteller, like an extraordinary storyteller. I can't even overstate that. But the thing that he taught me in working on that, and it's something that he says all the time in his speeches and whenever he's, in interviews, is this idea that's so important to him, which is that, proximity is what opens the door for justice, right? We have to get close to problems and to people. We have to actually get in the room before we can really even understand, who we all are and care for each other the way that we need to care for each other. And as an editor and as a publisher, that's been one of my real sort of guiding lights, because I feel like the books that we publish, we are always trying to figure out ways to get as close as possible to the stories of people and the ideas that people have, and to kind of close that distance between the reader and this sort of vast world of experience, because that's the key to justice is proximity, and that's something that can happen through literature, which I think so it's both like his mantra when it comes to criminal justice and the work he does there, but it's also the thing he does in his work.
Yeah, well, there's nothing, you're right. There's nothing like a book to bring you intimately into a quarter that perhaps you've never seen before. So that's so true, Chris. Both of you have broken down walls in what you do as an author and as a publisher. Do you consider yourself activists? Are you activists with a lot of work still to do, Ibram?
So actually, I personally identify as a scholar or as a writer, and that's largely because I have such reverence for activists, and even in How to Be an Anti-Racist, I ended up sort of defining an activist as someone who has a record of power and policy change, and so I've more so, at least my work has largely been shifting narratives, which presumably, of course, has led to some policy and power changes. But I just don't think everyone should be identified as an activist, just as I don't think everyone is a writer, right? And there are people who write books who may not necessarily themselves identify, as a writer. So yeah, but I do know I'm a scholar and a writer, and maybe that's my comfort zone. So that's where I identify.
Right. How about you, Chris?
Yeah, no, I agree with what Ibram's saying. Is that an activist is a very different thing. I mean, I work for a commercial company, and I think that it's sort of aligns with my own kind of personal mission in life. But, I've worked with, I published a book with Alicia Garza last year, for instance, and other activists I've worked with over the years. And it's different what they do and what I do, and like Ibram said, I think it's so important that all of us use whatever talent, skill, access, ability that we have to kind of move the ball forward, but we all do it in different ways. I hope in my case that I'm doing it in some way, but it's different than an activist. I've learned so much just even working with Alicia about, what it means to organize, what it means to be an activist, to be on the front lines, to be strategic in that way, and focused in that way. And I think that that's a special role, but I think we all have a role.
Ibram, you write a great deal about your own personal evolution, going from what you described in How to Be an Anti-Racist. You described yourself as a racist, not only against whites, but sometimes against your own fellow blacks. Tell us a bit about that personal journey. What kept you firmly on that road?
I think what kept me firmly on the road of, striving to be anti-racist was definitions and having I think as I've traveled more on the road, I think I gained a more clearer sense of what it meant to be racist, and what ultimately it meant to be anti-racist. Although I wasn't necessarily always using that terminology, but I think the more that I understood the different sides of history, the more I wanted to be on the anti-racist side of history. But then also, I should also add that I was just continuously challenged by experiences and by other people, in my life, when I was looking upon, white people as evil, or when I was looking upon black poor people as deficient, or black women as the problem, or, I had people continuously challenging me, causing me to realize that the problem was actually those ideas, as opposed to the people.
Well, you described that so wonderfully in that book. And Chris, you've enriched our lives with a great array of publications. Can you tell us about a childhood memory or a galvanizing experience that predisposed you to your career?
One of the interesting things about being a black person in America is the history of black people, black culture even, is like a history of both individuals and of movements and curators. And I just watched this documentary the other day about Motown, and how it was like there's these moments when people gather, right? It's not just about one person, or going all the way back to whatever, the Niagara movement or the Harlem Renaissance, or there are these moments in history where you see that change happens in a collective way, right? It's not just through like one individual. And that was something that always like fascinated me as a kid when I would read these stories. I mean, also just general stories about, movements in art, movements in politics, across history. It was always, kind of this fascinating idea that you can, instead of feeling like you're just this sort of node in the world, that you can actually connect, and so being in that role of curation and connection and support and collaboration just struck me as being essential, and essential to any kind of movement for change. One of the things I admire so much about Ibram is that he could be, the standalone intellectual, scholar king right now if he wanted to be, but it's always been about how do you build institutions? How do you bring more people in? How do you build bridges to even so it's not just about, your own racial group, but you can build bridges to other groups and bring other people in and expand the ideas. And that to me is the most exciting thing in the world, and is also something that, that I witnessed in various ways in my life.
Well, that's really inspiring. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Ibram Kendi, Dr. Kendi, and Chris Jackson, for all the work you do to open minds and take the American conversation to a new place. It's been wonderful chatting with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
And now, thank you. And now, Sam, over to you.
That was great. I don't think I heard anyone mention my book, but luckily we're going to hear from some more beloved authors about the books that have inspired them. So we still have time.
Hello, my name is Morgan Jerkins, and I'm an author and the senior culture editor at ESPN's The Undefeated. And today I want to talk about Sharp by Michelle Dean. It is a wonderful book that combines biography, literary criticism, and cultural history to contextualize the lives of some of the most famous women in the world of arts and letters, like Joan Didion, Nora Ephron, Janet Malcolm, Susan Sontag, and Zora Neale Hurston. And this book is really important for me because as a young writer, editor, journalist, author, if you will, I wanted to know more about the obstacles that those who came before me faced. And Dean does this so well, so sensitively, and so delicately. She gives honor to these women in a way that I think that we'll be talking about for years to come. So Sharp is that book, and Dean herself, as a documentarian of these women's lives, is in fact Sharp.
I'm Christina Baker Kline. This novel, The Hours, is one of my all-time favorites, and it contributed to a breakthrough in my own writing. When I read it in a headlong rush, and then again slowly, I was writing a novel called Orphan Train. In the mornings before I sat down to write, I'd open The Hours at random and read a few paragraphs, finding inspiration in the incredibly clear and lucid prose. I was amazed at how Michael Cunningham created two equally compelling perspectives, which was what I was also trying to do. How quickly and fluidly the stories moved forward, together and apart, and that the book was epic in scope and yet intimate. There's no question in my mind that my own novel is better as a result of my obsession with The Hours. It will always have a place on my short shelf of favorite books.
Hi, this is David Baldacci. A friend of mine recommended this book, Cast, The Origins of Our Discontents by Isabel Wilkerson. If you want a fresh analytical perspective on what is going on in this country right now, today, that's based on historical analysis, not only from the United States, but places around the world that have their own caste systems, this is the book for you. I can't recommend it more highly. I hope you read it. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you discuss it with your friends and get the word out. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Isaac Fitzgerald, and the book that changed my life are the stories of Brice de J Pancake. When I was a young reader and I first got my hands on this book, I had never seen so many of the emotions or experiences that I myself had reflected back on me on the page. Now, Brice was writing in Virginia about areas of Virginia and West Virginia. I was growing up in New England, so there's also many differences and many things that sparked my imagination. But I loved those stories so much, and basically became obsessed with telling anyone that I could about them. I've probably given away over 20 to 30 copies of those collected stories over the course of my lifetime, which is why I don't have a copy of it to hold up right now, because I have given the last one that I purchased, which was not that long ago, away. Anyways, the stories of Brice de J Pancake changed my life, made me want to be a writer. If you have not read them, let me know. I will be sure to give you my next copy.
Hi, my life has of course been changed by any number of books, but if I could talk about just one today, I'd like to talk about Richard Nisbet's The Geography of Thought. This is how Asians and Westerners think differently and why. I am the daughter of Chinese immigrants. That means that I grew up noticing that my parents thought about things very differently than the people around me. It turns out that the difference does go right down to the perceptual level, and that it affects not only how they think about things, but how they narrate things, a subject of great interest to me. I cannot recommend this book highly enough. It is of interest not only to people who do feel that they see things or speak about things in a different way than others, but for everybody who's interested in the world.
Hi, my name is Margot Lee Shetterly, and I'm the author of Hidden Figures. We always think of the great and serious books as the ones that inspire our lives, and that has certainly been true for me. But sometimes it's humor and a great story that sparks our imagination. One of my favorite books is The Westing Game by Ellen Raskin. And one of the characters in this book is a serious, ambitious little girl, which I was as well. I saw her world as a world that was so different from the world that I came from, and yet I recognized her in myself. I think the best books make us see what's been inside of us all along.
Once again, congratulations to Louise Erdrich, Ibram Kendi, and Chris Jackson and his team at One World. On behalf of the Authors Guild Foundation, thank you to all of our supporters and thank you to everyone for joining us this evening. And now, if you'll excuse me, I think there is just enough time for me to squeeze in a bath and another few chapters of my raunchy romance novel before bed. Oh, here comes my cat to say, good night, everyone.